9:09 p.m. on New Year's Eve. Welcome to the live stream. And I should say that it is extraordinarily dark, grim, gray, black, dismal, depressing, um, you know, a very much a downbeat Budapest here. And a fitting coda to the year, and in the full anticipation that tomorrow, as the first day of the year, it will be even darker, grayer, and even more dismal. But on a more upbeat note, thank you very much, everybody who has joined me here on the the last live stream of 2024. So it's New Year's Eve. I imagine everybody has parties to go to and lots of entertaining and fun things to do. I don't, but I'm sure that Gagglers do, and guests on YouTube who should join our locals group. I mean, we definitely want everybody to join our group. Um, Ideally, for purposes of keeping the dogs happy, but with a nice, tidy little sum or subscription. It's not very much, but whatever it is. And but even if you don't want to keep the dogs happy, and I don't blame you, um, you know, you can join and have a free subscription, and you still get an awful lot of excellent content. And we have our film clubs, we have our book clubs, we have our music clubs. So there's something for everyone. Anyway, this is very nice. We have, Tahira Fazal says, hello, sir. Happy New Year to your entire team. Well, thank you very much. I'll pass that on. Our team comprises the dogs. They don't consider, they consider me as part of their team. I'm not your team. You're my team. Is how they consider it. And Ray J also wishes a happy New Year. So thank you so much. One thing that I wanted to bring up before we talk about more more substantive issues as to what may be significant in 2025. But one thing that will be significant is the German election. We didn't get a chance to talk about the German election on Monday's live stream. Well, that's happening on I think February the 26th, either 26th or the 23rd. I can't remember. And of course, all the expectation is that the CDU CSU coalition will come in first, but they'll not be able to form a government of their own. They will have to form a coalition, probably with the Social Democrats, and may well be with the Greens. So not much is to be expected from, as far as the government goes, in terms of a change in policy. I mean, the CDU leader Friedrich Merz has attacked Schultz for being insufficiently warlike in his approach to Russia. So Merz, intends to send the Taurus missiles to Russia. And presumably he's going to remove any restrictions on the use of the missiles, just as the British, the French, and the Americans have done. But what I think we're all watching for is how the various populist parties the Alternative für Deutschland Party, or the Populist Party on the right, and then the Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht's party on the populist left, and how they're going to do. Now, what was interesting with the AFD was that Elon Musk issued about a week ago. He sent out a tweet saying, only the AFD can save Germany. Now, this is entirely a totally unacceptable, reprehensible, horrific, nightmarish thing that you can say as far as the German elite is concerned. And this, of course, caused absolute outrage among the German bien-pensants, the political elites and the media elites. Because they've been trying to create a firewall around the AFD, and saying, no civilized, no respectable person can have anything to do with the AFD. Nothing. They are under investigation by the German security services, the internal security services, who apparently can investigate and openly declare that they're investigating an organization that they, the unelected security services, they deem to be extremist. And they say the AFD is extremist, and so they're under surveillance. And all political parties, and that includes, in fact, the Sarah Wagenknecht's party, have said, we will have nothing to do with the AFD. No matter how many votes they get, we will not form any kind of a political alliance with them. So when Musk said this, of course caused huge outpouring of anguish and rage. And of course, Musk was condemned by Chancellor Scholz, or Sergeant Scholz, as we call him here, and everybody, the president, everyone from the president on down, condemned Musk for wading into internal German political affairs. But as if that was not enough, Musk then penned an op-ed for Welt. It used to be known as Die Welt. It's not now known as Welt. And this op-ed on Welt am Sonntag, that was appeared on Sunday, was really just an elaboration on that tweet, which he said only the AFD can save Germany. This, of course, did cause a sensation. Indeed, it caused a sensation at Welt. Now, Welt is a right-of-center newspaper. I mean, it's owned by Axel Springer, the Axel Springer Verlag. So it's no longer not the Axel Springer who used to be hated so much, but so this is his offspring. But it's the Axel Springer Verlag, the publisher, and the opinion editor, or the op-ed page editor, resigned in a huff over the publication of this op-ed by Musk. But this was decided on at the highest level within Welt to publish this. So what it's amazing what you can do if you have money. I mean, no, it would be inconceivable for Welt or any other respectable German publication. Again, Welt is essentially, as I say, right of center. So it's supporting the Christian Democrats. It's like the Tory party. So it's very much like either the Telegraph or the Times of London, and so Musk published this, and after uh, publishing it, then the big guy there, some 39-year-old Wunderkind, who is the head of the Welt group of um, publications, he wrote a rebuttal. So I want to just show you what it was that Musk said in this um, yeah, in this article. Hope everyone can see this. And can everyone see this? Can hold it? Let me do this again. Um, Rumble's a real pain. Anyway, so here we have there's the German title, Warum Elon Musk auf die AfD setzt and warum dabei irrt. So basically, why Elon Musk is on AfD side and why he's wrong, and that why he's wrong, that refers obviously to the rebuttal from this the big shot at Welt. So he starts out saying Germany is at a critical juncture. Its future teeters on the brink of economic and cultural collapse. As someone who has made significant investments in Germany's industrial and technological landscape, I believe I have the right to speak openly about its political orientation. The AfD is the last spark of hope for this country. So again, he doubles down. The last the AfD, it's such a provocation to German bien-pensant opinion who have been reviling the AfD for years. I mean, they've been absolutely sort of, they've been talking about banning the party altogether. There are moves within the Bundestag to ban the AfD. And for Musk to come in and say the AfD is the last spark of hope for this country is quite extraordinary. And then he says, economic revival, the German economy, once the engine of Europe, is now mired in bureaucracy and overwhelming regulations. The AfD has understood that economic freedom is not just desirable but necessary. Its approach of reducing government overregulation, cutting taxes, and deregulating the market reflects the principles that made Tesla and SpaceX successful. So that's not really terribly exciting because, of course, every right of center conservative party, whether it's in the United States, the UK, everywhere in Europe, we want to, reduce government regulation, cut taxes, and return to free market principles. It's the usual blather. Nothing particularly outstanding there. If Germany wants to regain its industrial strength, it needs a party that doesn't just talk about growth, but also takes political action to create an environment where companies can thrive without heavy government intervention. Again, nothing very exciting, but Germany does have a problem. I mean, it's nowhere near as dynamic an economy as, of course, it could be, and particularly given the huge burdens that the migrants have imposed on it, the huge burdens that it faces. We're coughing up this money for Ukraine and then housing Ukrainian refugees and so on. And then here we have immigration and national identity. Germany has opened its borders to a very large number of migrants. Although this was done with humanitarian intentions, it has led to significant cultural and social tensions. The AfD advocates a controlled immigration policy that prioritizes integration and the preservation of German culture and security. This is not about xenophobia, but about ensuring that Germany does not lose its identity in the pursuit of globalization. A nation must preserve its core values and cultural heritage in order to remain strong and united. Well, here you see he's saying something um, quite controversial when he says talks about the preservation of German culture um, and German identity, because basically we've been led to think, and Germans particularly have been led to think that German culture and German identity are really bad things, and the sooner Germany loses its German culture and German identity, the better off Germany will be. And then he goes on but talks about energy. The energy policy pursued by the current coalition is not only economically costly, but also geopolitically naive. Germany's decision to phase out nuclear power and instead rely heavily on coal and imported gas, as well as on volatile wind and solar power, which is clearly that whole net zero, ridiculous net zero policy, without the battery storage on the grid needed to ensure stability, has left the country vulnerable, especially in terms of power disruptions. The AFD takes a pragmatic approach to energy and advocates a balanced approach. I hope that they will consider expanding safe nuclear power combined with battery storage to cushion large fluctuations in electricity consumption, because that is the obvious solution. And then the political realism. The traditional parties have failed in Germany. Their policies have led to economic stagnation, social unrest, and an erosion of national identity. The AfD, even though it is described as far right, represents a political realism that resonates with many Germans who feel their concerns are ignored by the establishment. So this is quite contentious. So even though it's described as far right, represents a political realism that resonates with many Germans who feel their concerns are ignored by the establishment. It addresses the problems of the day without the political correctness that often obscures the truth. Portraying the AfD as far right is clearly false, considering that Alice Weidel, the party's leader, has a same sex partner from Sri Lanka. Does that sound like Hitler to you? Come on. It is actually quite extraordinary that I guess she's the public face of the. I mean, she's not quite the party's leader. She's the leader of the party in the Bundestag, but she has become the public face of the AfD. And yeah, I mean, she has she has a same sex partner, and it's not something that comes as a great surprise. I mean, I think she does come across as a lesbian. I mean, when you see her, I mean, she makes no attempt to conceal who she is. Anyway, to those who condemn the AfD as extremist, I say don't be fooled by the label attached to it. Look at its policies, economic plans, and efforts to preserve culture. Germany needs a party that is not afraid to challenge the status quo, that is not stuck in the politics of the past. The AfD can save Germany from becoming a shadow of its former self. It can lead the country into a future where economic prosperity, cultural integrity, and technological innovations are not just dreams but reality. Germany has become too comfortable with mediocrity. It is time for bold change, and the AfD is the only party that opens that path. Now, Musk sent out a tweet yesterday suggesting that he's going to have one of those spaces. I mean, he said it in the tone was somewhat tongue in cheek, but it could well be that he's going to have an interview with Alice Weidel on his spaces, which will certainly be quite interesting to say the least. Anyway, the response came from this wunderkind, Jan Philipp Burgard, who from the 1st of January, otherwise, from in a few hours' time, he will be the Weltchefredakteur. In other words, he's going to be the chief editor of the Welt group of publications. So not just Welt, but of all the publications. So he says, instead of relying on the Western ties that have been beneficial to Germany's prosperity and security since Konrad Adenauer, the AfD is seeking rapprochement with Russia. So that's its great sin. So first of all, they attack the AfD as being, fascist, going back to Hitler and so on. But the first thing he can say as the greatest sin of the AfD is rapprochement with Russia. Well, that's Hitler-like, isn't it? There is no condemnation of the war of aggression against Ukraine. Again, those are his main criticism of AfD. There's no condemnation of the war of aggression against Ukraine in the election manifesto. No, because they're primarily concerned with what's good for Germany, and they're not really that concerned with what they see as an intramural fight between two Slav nations. So it has nothing to do with Germany. Instead, the party calls for the restoration of undisturbed trade with Russia. Wait, imagine how terrible, what a terrible thing. Notice everything he's saying here, this Jan Philipp Burgard, the Wunderkind, the 39-year-old Wunderkind who's now got this big job at Welt, is he's really confirming what Musk is saying, which is that, this is what AfD is primarily concerned with, what is good for Germany, and not what allegedly is good for Ukraine. It's called the restoration of undisturbed trade with Russia. In other words, a way to restore prosperity for Germany, namely cheap energy from Russia rather than purchasing expensive energy from the United States or Norway or Qatar. Why do that when you can get it this from Russia? So he says, which includes the restoration of undisturbed trade with Russia, includes, imagine this, horrifically, the immediate lifting of economic sanctions against Russia and repair of the Nord Stream pipelines. Again, where's the Hitlerian agenda here? I mean, again, they want to remove economic sanctions against Russia, and they want to repair the Nord Stream pipelines. And who destroyed the Nord Stream pipelines? Well, it wasn't the AfD. But a return to dependence on Putin's gas will not save Germany. On the contrary, it would once again endanger Germany's energy security. So it would endanger Germany. Well, I mean, Germany is paying so much now for its energy that companies are leaving Germany and setting up shop in other countries, namely the United States. And it's not just because of Nord Stream and the cutting off of the oil and gas and coal from Russia, but because of the crazy net zero policies that Germany has been pursuing. And again, the AfD opposes it. So nothing here from Jan Philipp Burgard refutes anything that Musk said. Anyway, the AfD also has more friendly words for China than for the USA. Quote, the relationship with the People's Republic of China must be based on Germany's real political interests. Oh my God. Can you imagine anything as Hitlerian as that? In other words, we should stop bashing China over the head with our parochial obsessions with human rights. We want to be thinking about what's in Germany's interest. And obviously, what's in Germany's interest is to have solid commercial relations with China. And then this means appeasement towards Beijing. Appeasement. I mean, China's on the other side of the world. What does appeasement towards Beijing mean? I mean, is China threatening Germany? Is China doing anything at all that is damaging Germany's interests? America is, since it's Americans blow up the Nord Stream pipeline. Americans did indeed threaten Germany's national interests. America that has pressed for involvement in the war in Ukraine, America that has pressed for sanctions against Russia, America has indeed threatened Germany's interests, but China hasn't. And then Donald Trump, who has identified China as the USA's greatest systemic rival, is unlikely to have much enthusiasm for this kind of rescue of Germany. Well, that may be the case, but on the other hand, I mean, if Trump, is going to go down the path of America first, then that's a signal for other countries to say, yeah, that's fine. America should pursue America first. And by the same token, Germany should pursue Germany first, and France should pursue France first. And so that's the way it should be, rather than signing on to fake, phony, baloney transatlantic alliances that serve no one's interest at all. And then Musk sees the AfD as a solution to migration policy. Germany is indeed struggling with out of control immigration. Well, who's responsible for that? So he acknowledges that Germany is indeed struggling with out of control immigration. Well, whose fault is that? It isn't the AfD's fault, and it's not Putin's fault. But the AfD is wandering around with unrealistic remigration plans for millions of people. Well, it's always interesting, this unrealistic. Well, it's unrealistic if you don't want to make them realistic. But what's interesting, and Trump is the one who kind of blazed the trail with this, he suddenly made talk of deportation acceptable. It was completely unacceptable. Nobody ever talked about deportation until Trump. Well, once Trump again blazes a trail on this path, then other countries are going to say, yeah, deportation. You're going to have to force countries. I mean, of course, countries are going to say initially, no, we're not going to take them. Absolutely no, we're not going to take these people. But that's when you then apply coercion. You make them take them back, or else you're going to take measures against them. I mean, most of these countries are, very poor countries, and it shouldn't be that difficult for a rich country such as Germany to coerce poor countries to take back these migrants. So Trump said, "Yeah, that's what I'm going to do. We're going to do this deportation." And now this has become acceptable to talk in this way. Again, as I say, it was nowhere was it acceptable to talk about deportations. And so it was, oh no, we can't possibly, we can't deport them. These people, they're Germans, or they're British. They're all British. Apparently, the moment you set foot on British soil, you become British. No, they're British. You can't send somebody back to Jamaica because he's British. He's as British as you or I are. So anyway, in contrast, the CDU under Friedrich Merz has woken up and wants to turn away from Merkel's uncontrolled do-gooder policy. So now you see they've turned against Merkel. All those years that Merkel dominated German politics, especially dominated the CDU, and Die Welt is of course a part of the CDU world. Now they're all dumping on Merkel. To this end, it has significantly toughened its stance, calling for rejections at the border and faster deportations of rejected asylum seekers. So now you've already allowed deportations, but then they're saying unrealistic remigration plans. Well, once you start rejecting the asylum seekers, then you can start rejecting and deporting others, such as those who came in seeking asylum and then never really bothered to follow up, or such as people who overstayed their tourist visas, or people who claimed all kinds of status that they're going to work or whatever, and have not really fulfill them. Students who just sort of stayed on and on and on. There are lots and lots of people that you can start rounding up and throwing them out. And I'm sure that even somebody who has been given permanent residency, but who has committed a crime, that person also can be deported. I mean, that's pretty. If you've broken the rules that you were supposed to have followed when you were granted permanent residence, then essentially your permanent residence is cancelled, and then you're eligible for deportation. So it's not really that impossible to do. Unrealistic remigration plans. Anyway, such measures shows that there are alternatives to the AFD's right-wing extremist positions. And then he goes on, if Musk thinks that classifying the AFD as right-wing extremist is clearly wrong, he is making a major mistake. The AFD is not just Alice Weidel, but also Bjorn Höcke. A court ruling allows him to be described as a right-wing extremist. I love this. I love the way a court decides what you can and cannot call somebody. Höcke has also been convicted several times for using a banned Nazi slogan, everything for Germany sounds like Hitler. So he's being facetious, with the sounds like Hitler. I don't know. To be honest, I mean, this everything for Germany it seems to me like fairly innocuous. But anyway, the AFD with its Höcke wing, its pandering to Russia and China, and its rejection of America. But again, this is where I'm always puzzled. How is this Hitlerian? Hitler kind of was kind of an admirer of the English and the Americans. Hitler was always very much an admirer of America. He certainly didn't want to get into a war with America. He was a huge fan of America's immigration policy, which basically kept everybody out. In those days, it did. And he was a huge fan of America's eugenics policy. And indeed, he followed in Germany the eugenics policy that the United States had been pursuing. And certainly he was not a fan of Russia. And he did kind of like it is true, he kind of liked the Chinese and the Japanese, but he definitely did not like Russia. And its rejection of America and the EU is by no means the last spark of hope for this country. As Elon Musk writes, it is a danger to our values and our economy. Even a genius can be wrong. So, that's kind of what it's obviously an interesting foray into German politics on the part of Musk. And the question is, and I don't as yet know the answer. We'll probably have some guests on at the Gaggle who will help us answer that question. What impact will Musk's intervention have in German politics? Because he obviously, he's not a German. I guess he's identified with the United States. He's identified with Trump, but given his stature, given his enormous reputation, for him to come out endorsing the AFD in this way, would this have an effect on Germans who are at least torn on the question of vote. In other words, there might be people who are tempted to vote for the AFD, but think that this is just too disreputable. I'm going to lose all all of the esteem of my peers if I were to support the AFD. Would those people say, yeah, but hey, Elon Musk has said that it's okay to vote for the AFD. So that would be interesting because we know that the AFD has made serious inroads in the east of the country, in the former German Democratic Republic, hasn't really made too many inroads in the west of the country, but the western part of the country might be um, attempted to follow a path laid down by Elon Musk. So it will be quite interesting how that's going to play out. Anyway, let's now take a look at our locals page. As I always say, the locals page is where our members, the people who really do so much to help us, and above all to keep the dogs um, happy to the extent that they can be happy. Then they're usually not especially happy, but to the extent that they are happy. They're all members of our locals community, and I again urge everybody to join us. Ideally you would subscribe, but if you don't, you can just simply be. Ideally you would pay a subscription fee, but if you don't pay a subscription fee, you can't afford it. You could at least be a member of our community and enjoy all the things that we have here. Anyway, so the first comment comes from Ivan Grozny. Good evening, Happy New Year. And so he says, wishes me a happy new year. He says, I saw what Lavrov said about Trump's ceasefire proposals. Perhaps this somewhat indicates that the Russians won't take a simple ceasefire and NATO delay for Ukraine. I'm curious if you think that Trump will actually get the Russians to agree to a deal, at least in the relatively short term. And what do you think is the ground strategy of the SMO up until January the 20th? Well, this is very interesting because it seems to be that if one tries to figure out what the Russians are doing now, it sounds as if they are pushing for to grab as much territory as possible in anticipation of Trump, because they have really stepped up the ante um, in their attacks in the Donbass. So they're really at a huge sacrifice. I mean, it's clear. We obviously we don't know the numbers, but the loss of life, the Russian loss of life, is quite colossal. So they're moving as aggressively as possible in the Donbass to take as much territory. And why are they doing this? Then you have to think they're waiting on Trump. They know that Trump is going to engage, at least for the first 6 months. He will engage in some kind of diplomacy. I would imagine Kellogg will be his Kissinger. He's going to move, go from Moscow to Kiev with this peace plan, and see if he can get some kind of an agree. Now, the peace plan, I would imagine, would be a ceasefire in place. I mean, that basically that would be the condition of any peace plan: a ceasefire in place. That doesn't mean that these will be the final borders or anything like that, but a ceasefire in place, and then issues about borders, issues about maybe some exchanges of territory, because obviously, as things stand, it doesn't look like Russia is going to push Ukrainians out of Kursk. I mean, they may. I mean, that may happen, but it doesn't look like they're going to succeed in pushing the Ukrainians out of Kursk. So if you freeze everything in place, then everything will have to be then discussed at some future negotiations, and whether they're going to get round the table or whether it's going to be some sort of shuttle diplomacy on the part of Kellogg. I don't know, but there'll be some kind of exchanges of territory. So even if you freeze everything in place, then you still have to think about, okay, well, obviously Ukrainians can't stay on in Kursk, so they're going to have to withdraw from Kursk. But in exchange, the Russians are going to have to withdraw from some of the territory that it's occupying now. I don't know exactly where, but they will have to do it. That'll be part of some kind of an exchange of territory. And then they'll say, okay, the issue of the future status of these territories, okay, that we can postpone that for the future. Obviously, the United States isn't going to accept their incorporation of the territories that are now under Russian occupation, their incorporation into the Russian Federation. That's not going to happen. But what would happen is that the Americans will say, we're going to take the issue of NATO membership off the table. We're not going to talk about that now. But we are going to issue all kinds of bilateral security guarantees to Ukraine. There's nothing. Russia can't stop that. Russia cannot stop the United States and other countries from issuing bilateral security guarantees, and they've already done that. And then the Americans will commit themselves to, which is I think what Kellogg will tell Zelensky, we're going to give you everything you want, all your arms, ammunition, shell, artillery, and so on. We're going to keep providing you, essentially, in preparation for round two, which that may happen in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, but essentially, it brings the war to an end now. Now, but go back to the question. Well, you're saying, you said here that this indicates that the Russians won't take a simple ceasefire and NATO delay for Ukraine. Well, that I think, in theory, that's true. But at the same time, that's a lot of big talk. It's like people saying, well, Russia's not going to accept this. Russia's not going to accept that. Russia's going to march on into Kiev. Russia's going to take Odessa. Russia is going to force an unconditional surrender on Kiev. Russia's going to drive NATO out of Ukraine. Well, that's a lot of big talk. I mean, the fact is, Russia hasn't done that. Russia has not accomplished these goals. That the war's been going on for 3 years, and Russia has not accomplished any of those goals. Russia has not taken a single major city in Ukraine. It's increased its occupation of Ukraine. I mean, I think in February 2022, at the start of the SMO, I think Russia was in occupation of 7% of the territory. Now it's in occupation of about 20%. So it's increased. But 80% of Ukraine is not under Russian occupation. So it's very difficult to say, well, we're not going to accept this, we're not going to accept that. Well, okay. If you're not going to accept it, then what happens then? And you'd have to say, well, what happens then is that the war continues. Now, with Trump, there's always a risk that he may really seriously escalate. Um, I don't believe for one moment that the Americans don't have anything in the cupboard, and they don't have any other weapons or anything. I think they do have that, and I think that they can escalate, and they can escalate the um, the attacks on Russian territory, and they can really seriously escalate attacks on key Russian infrastructure, key Russian factories, energy facilities, electricity grids, and everything else. They can really inflict. And that, I think, what Trump will say. Okay, if you don't accept our proposal, we're going to make life very, very difficult for you. I mean, Ukraine already has a lot of drones. And Ukraine is manufacturing drones, or will soon be manufacturing drones, and Americans can provide Ukraine with drones, and so they can start hitting Russia's economic facilities, and they will say, well, these are legitimate targets because we're hitting Russia's war effort. So far, they haven't really done that. They've done that a little bit. They have hit oil refineries. And they have hit some air bases, but they haven't done that much. But they can certainly escalate with attacks on Russia's economic assets. So that's going to keep raising the costs for Russia, and I think that's where Trump would probably go if the Russians say, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to pursue victory. But the problem with this idea that we're going to pursue victory is that Russia really doesn't have the manpower at this stage to pursue this victory, because Russia has chosen to send to the front volunteers. People sign up, they get a big lump sum. Russia has increased this payment, this one-time payment to volunteers. So they sign up for this big lump sum, and then they get sent to the front. So there hasn't been the full mobilization. But what that means is that ultimately it's still, the numbers are just not there to push for an overwhelming victory. Ukraine has mobilized. Ukraine does have has gone for full mobilization. So, in terms of how many men are actually fighting on the front, that's quite comparable. Russia doesn't have any more men fighting than Ukraine does. So that means that even if you keep grinding this out, even if you keep taking village after village after village, and maybe they're going to take Pokrovsk. We've been hearing about this. Well, let's say they do finally take Pokrovsk at huge casualties. This is going to be a very, very casualty heavy operation to take Pokrovsk. They still need to take even the sort of the biggest strategic objectives in Donetsk. So Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, those still have to be taken. And those are going to be very heavily defended. So that's going to be a huge undertaking itself. So the question then is, does Russia have the manpower? So I think the Russians say, okay, well, we're getting, every year we're getting something like 300,000, maybe 400,000, maybe 450,000 people signing up to fight in Ukraine. Okay, but how many are getting killed and seriously wounded? In other words, they get injuries that disable them permanently. In other words, they have to be sent back, and they can't be. They will never return to the front. That's quite a lot. That's quite a lot. So the net effect will be that you may only have send 200,000 onto the front. That isn't really enough to push forward for victory. I mean, for victory, in other words, that kind of the victory that all these people like McGregor and others to talk about. Oh, we're going to take Odessa, we're going to take Kiev, Kharkov, Lvov. We're going to take all this. You just don't have the manpower. Because again, if you think back on the Red Army, and everyone's always thinking about the Red Army when they're going to say Russia's not going to accept this, Russia's not going to accept. They're always thinking about, Zhukov is still commanding these massive, millions and millions of men under arms, and Timoshenko is doing this, and Konyev is doing that, and Rokossovsky, all these great Red Army generals. We don't have them anymore. This isn't the Red Army. It should have been obvious by now, 3 years on, that this isn't the Red Army. So if you don't have that manpower, then it doesn't matter whether you take some strategic objective, because the whole point of taking a strategic objective is if you then are able to push forward, you've now captured this vital possession of your adversary. Now you can push forward, send your armies in, and then occupy huge tracts of your adversary's land. I mean, then that's the whole point of capturing a strategic objective. But if you don't have the manpower to go on, you've just captured it. Then what? That doesn't you don't achieve anything that way. Because then you become vulnerable to a counterattack. Okay, you're now in possession of Pokrovsk. Well, what are you going to do now? And this Pokrovsk operation is going to be quite heavy in casualties. So I don't know where they're going to get the additional manpower to go for Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, which are the key objectives in Donetsk. Anyway. So what I'm saying is that, yes, Russia can talk big. We're not going to accept anything like this. But I would say that what they're doing now would indicate that they're preparing for some kind of a settlement with Trump. That they're trying to take as much territory now as possible, and then see if they can work something out with Trump. Now, the problem there, of course, is that any agreement short of complete defeat for the Kiev regime, any agreement is just, this is the end of round one. That NATO and the Ukraine that will exist for the 80% of that territory will be planning for a rematch. 20 years, end of World War One, and then World War II starts again. That's 20 years, it's for the rematch. Because NATO will definitely be rearming, retraining Ukraine for the task of getting that territory back. They're going to go for the return of this territory, because they're not going to accept that they've now been incorporated within the Russian Federation. So, obviously, I mean, what would one expect Russia to say? Russia will say, no, we're not going to accept this. No, absolutely not. But that's your first round of in your negotiations. You're obviously putting down your maximal position, which is we're going to go on and press on for victory. We're winning, and we can take this. Even though, as I say, the question is winning is very, very dubious. Now, if Russia settles to this, now, and the other thing is, of course, will Trump give the Russians a sweetener, which is some kind of a global security conference, along the lines of Helsinki 2.0, in which, I mean, they're obviously not going to sign any kind of any agreement. That isn't going to happen. Anything like the Helsinki Final Act of 1975. Nothing like that will happen. But will Trump say at least, well, we'll have a conference and everybody will air their grievances? I frankly don't see much point in that. I mean, unless there'll be some kind of a document that they'll sign on to, however meaningless, then the only purpose that such a conference will serve is that there'll be Russia and there'll be the 32 states of NATO, all of whom will be bashing Russia. Well, with the exception of Hungary, Slovakia, and maybe Turkey, but all the others will be bashing Russia. And then if they bring on some other non-NATO powers, they're bound to be allies of NATO's. I mean, they'll bring on Japan and South Korea. Of course, Russia can then bring on China, whatever that's worth, and maybe North Korea, or I don't know. So I don't quite know what the purpose of such a conference would be, but Trump could offer that. Again, I don't think it's a great deal for Russia, but it does bring the fighting to an end, and that's the big benefit of something like this. If it brings it to an end, because now one reason why I don't think that, or at least why I think that this might not work, is that once the Washington crowd gets a sense of what's being planned here, they're going to start, berating Trump, attacking Trump for selling out. Hey, this is a huge defeat for NATO. This is a victory for Putin. This is a victory for fascism. This is a victory for the KGB, victory for Stalin. Democracy is under threat. Our values are in jeopardy. We can't do this. We can't possibly do this. And then Trump may then put in some new stipulation, such as, but in 3 years' time we'll have a referendum on NATO membership, or in 3 years' time we'll have a referendum on the status of the territories. But the moment they put in something like any kind of a referendum, Russia's going to say, well, we can't really do it because we know what you're going to do with these referendums. I mean, you're going to have to cheat like mad, and you're very good at cheating and stealing elections and cheating like mad in referendums. So we might actually, escape this in the sense that it's not going to happen, because they're just going to put this in, put in an additional requirement, and Russia will be forced to say no. It's kind of, obviously there's the Istanbul Agreement. Everyone was ready to sign on, and then Boris Johnson flies in and say, "Hey, we've got Russia on the run. What do you want to sign any agreement with them? And even if you sign an agreement, we at NATO are not going to accept this agreement." That's what Boris Johnson told Zelensky. And then the analogy I've always cited is the Rambouillet negotiations, which again I use the term negotiations loosely. It was just simply a dictum imposed by the Americans. And then they made these demands on the Serbs, and they thought, the Serbs are bound to say no. This is so humiliating for them that they're going to say no. And then once they say no, we can just bomb them, happily. But the wily Serbs, or the wily Milosevic, knowing that this was a trap, that they wanted this rejection from the Serbs in order to get the bombing off the ground, they said, "Yeah, we accept these terms. Yeah, that's fine. No matter how humiliating, we accept them." So they said, "Well, what are we going to do now?" And then so then they imposed something like with that the famous Appendix B, which was which was essentially a NATO invasion of Serbia. Well, all right, you accept this. How about this? Do you accept NATO invasion of Serbia, uncontrolled NATO movement in and out of Serbia, and NATO forces doing whatever they want inside Serbia, NATO forces not accepting Serbian jurisdiction? How about that? Do you accept that? Well, that was just that step was just they couldn't really go there. So that's why I think that we might be lucky, and the Americans will just impose something within this agreement that will be just so outrageous and so humiliating for Russia that that the Russians are going to say no. The other question, and that we'll have to see, is whether Putin will survive, because this will not be a good deal for Russia, and Russia has now expended an awful lot in lives and treasure for not a great deal. And Putin, of course, will say, "Hey, we won. We got to go. We've done so well. Just like after Syria, hey, this has gone really well for us." But the Russian security chiefs will not be persuaded. So you have to then wonder whether Putin will survive an agreement like this, or whether he'll be just removed from power in the way that Boris Yeltsin was just bundled out of power in 1999. And I don't know the answer to that. But if in the next few months we see a purge within the Russian military, then we'll know that Putin is preparing some kind of a deal with the Americans, and he's removing everyone from power who might be a threat to him, in the event of signing such a bad deal. So anyway, very interesting question, Ivan Grozny. Cynthia, always very good to see you. Thank you very much, Cynthia, as always, for your generosity. And I should say that we were watching the screening of the Baader-Meinhof complex yesterday, and in part of our cinema and terrorism poll. And while I wouldn't say it was a great film, nonetheless, I think it's interesting to watch, largely because it gave something, a sense of the craziness of that time, the craziness of Germany in the late 1960s and early 70s, when there were these weird kind of urban guerrilla movements springing up. And there were a number of these urban guerrilla movements around the world which were just nuts. I mean, because they had no hope of achieving any of their goals. I mean, they claim to be Marxist, Leninist, and so on, but neither Marx nor Lenin advocated just senseless violence. I mean, both Marx and Lenin obviously were in favor of violence, but violence with a view to achieving specific objectives. But the key, but Marx and Lenin realized, which is, well, you have to go to the masses. You have to at least get some support for your movement. But if you just simply go, engage in violence, then you're going to turn everybody off. You're just not going to be anyone other than a handful of these, crazy nihilists. And that's in fact what happened to the Baader-Meinhof gang, and then their successors, the Red Army faction. That there were just a handful of them. They had no support at all within Germany. And then when they committed suicide or were killed by the German security forces, not a dog barked. No one really cared very much about them. So it wasn't really a very successful movement. But there were these movements like the Tupamaros guerrillas in Uruguay. Same thing happened there. So they engaged in this urban guerrillas, but they never succeeded in gaining any mass support. But that was just all the craziness of that time. You had in the United States, you had the Symbionese Liberation Army. That's the crowd who kidnapped Patty Hearst, William Randolph Hearst's granddaughter. They kidnapped her, and then she joined the gang, and then of course they were arrested, and the U.S. authorities tried to prosecute her, but obviously they dropped the charges against her because she claimed that she was acting under duress, and she was obviously acting under duress. I mean, they kidnapped her. What else was she supposed to do? I mean, given she was trying to save her life, but to join the Symbionese Liberation Army herself. But they also didn't really do anything other than engage in pointless terrorism. Anyway, so it's worth taking a look at that film. But what's most important is to read Cynthia's fascinating insights and background information, and all her observations and details about the film. So you're going to learn a great deal about the Red Army faction, Baader Meinhof, and the making of this film. I mean, so it's an enormous amount of really really fascinating information that Cynthia's provided. So I strongly urge everyone to read that, either before you watch the film, or while you watch the film, or after you've watched the film. But it's a really absolutely, so together the film plus Cynthia's notes are, it's a package that is really vital for trying to understand that strange period in German and European history. Anyway, so thank you so much, Cynthia, for doing so much work there. So Cynthia says, thanks you for another year of insightful analysis. Thank you so much. Let's hope the next year will offer some possibility of more cheerful developments. Well, let's hope so. But I'm not someone who ever thinks that cheerful developments are possible. So I'm not the right man to come to for that. But we can hope. We can but hope. So happy New Year to you and all who gaggle about here regularly. Thank you so much, Cynthia. And again, thank you for all of your contributions here at the Gaggle, in our discussions, and above all in our film screenings. So thank you. Happy New Year to you. And look forward to so much more in the coming year. And Jenny, so good to see you again, Jenny. We really miss you. Wish you could join us more frequently. We miss your your pithy comments, your scabrous and pithy comments. We really, really miss that. So, but thank you so much, Cynthia. For Jenny, for joining us, and thank you again for your great generosity and your contribution. So, but please, New Year's resolution, please join us more regularly. I mean, you're always so much fun when you were here on a regular basis. But thank you so much, Jenny. And then Cynthia goes on. I like your idea of making cinema and court martials. Yeah, I was suggesting that we should, the next selection for the film screening should be cinema and court martials as a movie theme for the next movie poll to conduct here at the Gaggle. The only films that come to mind which contain such theme are The Cane Mutiny, starring Humphrey Bogart, Jose Ferrer, and Van Johnson, and Fred Murray, and The Rack, starring Paul Newman. Yeah, the Rack is very good because The Rack, I mean, the Cane Mutinies, I think I'd already thought about The Cane Mutiny. Were very, very good film. I mean, spoiled a little bit by some cheesy kind of Hollywood, a kind of tedious Hollywood romance. The actual court martial was really, and the mutiny itself, all that is really interesting. And then The Rack, I talked about The Rack. It wasn't a screening, but I did give a short a podcast about The Rack, but we didn't screen it, so we definitely can screen The Rack, which I think is a very interesting film because this is a person who was accused of collaborating with the enemy in the Korean War. But I think they're both very good suggestion. There have been a number of court martials movie. The one I kind of like is Breaker Morant, which was a very good film. It was about the Boer War, very well made. Um, that would be that I think I mean I think there've been a number of films with court martial. I mean we already had the Paths of Glory, so we've already screened that. But I mean, anyone else want to suggest films with the theme of court martials? Please do so. We're looking for ideas. But there've been a number of them. So, and then Cynthia said another film that might do well, George, is Otto Preminger, The Court Martial of Billy Mitchell, Gary Cooper. But it, however, doesn't get very good reviews. I don't know. I haven't seen that film. Let me write that down. The Court Martial of Billy Mitchell, because that's really the Court Martial, so that I don't forget. Because I have not seen that Court Martial of Billy Mitchell. I mean, people want to do. I'm sure people will suggest. What about A Few Good Men? I'm kind of wary of doing that, largely because I'm not a huge fan of Tom Cruise, and it's too. I guess I just felt it was too. It was just the theme of it was just too one-sided. I mean, what I liked about the Kane Mutiny, why I think it's so strong, leaving aside the sort of the cheesy romance, but what I liked about it was that it presented both sides, and it really made you think about every aspect of it. Whether the mutiny itself was justified, and then he presented the Humphrey Bogart character, I forgot his name, in a very sympathetic light. I mean, up until then, he was the person that you disliked, you hated him in the film, and you thought, oh, great, well, finally they overthrow him, and they mounted the mutiny. You were waiting, well, about Bleeding Time too. It's a little like the mutiny on the Bounty when they Captain Queeg is of course his name, yeah. But the mutiny on the Bounty, when they finally mutiny, you think, well, it's about Bleeding Time too. So you feel that, but as the court martial progresses, you feel sympathy for Captain Queeg, and you realize that the mutineers are not at all the admirable people that the film had led you to believe they were. So I think that's a really, it's a strong film, and I think it's going to be a strong contender, I think, for the screening. Dale Owens, always good to see you. And so good evening, Happy New Year. And then Meg 21093 says, the German psyche is beyond my comprehension. Are they unable to think logically? That's a very good it's a very good question. It may well be. It may well be that that they don't have it. I mean, the thing about, particularly, I mean, returning to the subject of the Baader Meinhof, is why would these young people, many of whom, not all of them, but many of whom I think came from quite, wealthy, well-to-do, middle-class families. Many of them had gone to good schools, they'd gone to universities. Most of them had gone to universities, and had done, they weren't at all, crazy. They were at university. They were actually quite studious. They sat their exams and did rather well in their exams. So they were intelligent people. They had you know, nice, comfortable life to look forward to. West Germany was a pretty nice place, in the 1960s and 70s. And yet they became completely obsessed with this really childish politics, absolutely childish, and went down this path of nihilism, pointless violence, and essentially they just threw their lives away. I mean, essentially they were um, somehow imbued with a death wish, because they had to have known that this rampage, this violent rampage that they were on, cannot go on forever. I mean, sooner or later, the authorities are going to get you, and you're either going to spend the rest of your life in prison, or you're going to get killed by the authorities. As it turned out, they really couldn't face the prospect of life in prison. But in Germany, unlike the United States, life in prison doesn't really mean life without the possibility of parole. I mean, life means essentially you do 20 years or 25 years and then you're released. So they would still have been released. They would have. I mean, they were very young, so they would have been released when they were middle aged. They'd be in their 50s, but at least they'd still have a few years left to enjoy. But they really couldn't face life in prison, and so I think most of them just committed suicide. Now, but the point is that why would people who are seemingly intelligent, seemingly educated, well-to-do, why would they just throw their lives away like that? And I think there was something uniquely German about their absolutism and their nihilism, and you'd have to think that there was that it did go back to something in the German national character. I mean, we all know, when we talk about Hitler, we talk about the the causes of the rise of Hitler. We know about the inflation. We know about the economic crash and the effect that had, and we all of that, and then the humiliation of 1918, the Versailles, and we can say all about the causes of Hitler, but it still doesn't fully explain why the Germans followed Hitler into a suicidal course that he launched, and that will always remain a mystery. That when they did this, I mean, it's always when Hitler had all these brilliant generals around him. He would go there, and in 1940 and 41, as they planned their invasion of the Soviet Union, again, these are really, the most brilliant generals ever. And they would sit there and they would all plan out this onslaught on the Soviet Union. Not one of them said, well, we can't just invade another country without a provocation. I mean, they haven't actually done anything to us. We don't really have any grievances against them. I mean, what's the predicate for this invasion? Not one of them asked that question. They started working all these things, we're gonna do this, he'll take this front, and then we're gonna take, they just got into the details of this. And of course, none of them asked the fundamental question, which was, well, Napoleon tried this and he failed. I mean, how the hell are you going to conquer and occupy a country as vast as this? We don't have an army big enough for that. We don't have the industrial resources big enough to pull this off. Whatever early victories we might accomplish, sooner or later, it's going to go against us. I mean, in other words, you'd think that these would be the obvious questions to ask in those meetings with Hitler, and they never did it. All of them, von Rundstedt and Halder and Keitel and Jodl. Again, these are all, in many ways, brilliant men, brilliant generals, but they didn't ask the most obvious question of that. This is a totally destructive, because if this goes wrong, Germany could be finished. I mean, as it was, Germany recovered after World War II. Could have gone the other way. Could easily have gone the other way, and that Germany would have just been dismantled. I mean, there were plenty of people who wanted to do that, just to dismantle Germany, and that could have. So, I mean, they took huge risk, and they got lucky in that the victorious powers decided not to dismember Germany, but if I were a betting man and I was thinking of 1944, 45, I think they're going to dismember Germany. There will cease to be a Germany. So again, it was a suicidal course that these extremely smart people had embarked upon. So to go back to your question, Meg, the German psyche is beyond my comprehension. Mine too. Are they unable to think logic? No, there's something missing. Again, there's a screw loose there. And again, if we bring it up to the present day, um, when Germany it sits on its hands and allows the United States to destroy its Nord Stream pipeline. It sits on its hands while the United States destroys its its energy infrastructure. And undermines Germany's economic competitiveness, and they don't do anything about it. And then instead they go on droning on about Russia, who doesn't do anything. Russia's not done anything to weaken or undermine Germany. The United States has, and again, you think, how is it that this obvious point, this obvious point, is missed by seemingly intelligent people? I mean, the people who run Die Welt or Der Spiegel or Die Zeit, and were in all the television stations. This must be obvious to them, and yet they don't see it. They just simply they say, oh, the American, there's a huge partnership with America ever since the great days of Adenauer. And then you think, and what has it got you? What are you getting out of this? So yeah. Anyway, let's go back. And then Cynthia goes back and says, also, George, what do you think of the idea of having cinema and false accusations of rape or sexual harassment? Well, I like the look of that. False accusations of rape and sexual harassment. That's a really good idea. I like that a lot. And here here are some of I mean, disclosure. That's the one I was also thinking of, that Oleana. Yeah, that I was thinking of that. Atonement. Was that about false? Maybe I'm thinking about, was that about false accusation? Gone Girl, the Danish film The Hunt, and last but not least, the British film Term of Trial. Whew. Yeah, I saw that film. That was Term of Trial, 1962, starring Laurence Olivier, Simone Signoret, and Sarah Miles. I have seen some of those. I've seen Atonement and I've seen Disclosure. I don't think I've seen Oleana. I've seen the others, but I did see Term of Trial. That was a good film. Yeah, that was Laurence Olivier playing a teacher who gets seduced by a young Sarah Miles. Sarah Miles in those days was kind of she played these very, very hot, seductive girls. I mean, she was in The Servant, which I think is also something that would be worth screening on the Gaggle, but I'm not exactly sure in what context to have The Servant. I mean, The Servant and Accident. They were both directed by Joseph Losey, and they both had a script by Harold Pinter. I think they'll both be really interesting on the Gaggle, but we'd have to think of in what context one would have them. But I like that term of trial. That's an interesting film. I haven't seen it in years, but I remember being really impressed by that. Again, Olivier is such a good actor. I mean, he becomes believable as a meek school teacher. You wouldn't think it. The man who played Richard III can then convey a meek school teacher. But thank you, Cynthia. Really good suggestion. I like that very much. And then Summer Petros. Thank you so much, Summer Petros. Really appreciate it. And then he says, Happy New Year to you, George, and fellow Gagglers. Boldog új évet kívánok, which in Hungarian is Happy New Year. So thank you so much. So Petros, thank you. And then, let me go back. Yeah, so Summer Petros then says, regarding the Baader-Meinhof gang and their eventual imprisonment and trial, don't understand why the authorities allowed them such free rein in the courtroom and in their prison wing, where they were allowed to freely associate with one another. Obviously, they should have been tried and imprisoned separately. Did the authorities not consider restricting their access to tobacco? I have to say, I completely agree with you. But again, it was very much at that moment in time, and I think that was entirely credible. This was still the culmination of the 1960s, and the whole. I wouldn't quite put it in the way of the summer of love, but that somehow authority was taking a holiday. Again, people who are going to remember, like the Paris 1968. It's like there was no police, there was no one was in authority. I mean, everything was just free. I mean, there was just you just you could just go anywhere. All buildings were open. This complete disappearance of authority, and I think there was a lot of that spirit around in the 1960s, and again in the United States, where you could just do anything at all, and the courtrooms and the authorities just seemed almost apologetic in how they dealt. I mean, if you take a look at a film, Bananas, with Woody Allen, and they have a kind of courtroom scene there, where this is again a political trial, and again, that courtroom in the Woody Allen film was very similar to the courtroom in this Baader-Meinhof thing. He's just pretty much has free reign. He can sort of rant and rave. He can ignore the judge. Everything at all. Inconceivable today. Absolutely inconceivable. You do anything like that today, boom, contempt of court. You'll be banned from the courtroom, thrown in jail. It just wouldn't happen. But it was just a peculiarity of that time, and I think that as I said, I think that followed what's in the film follows pretty accurately what happened in real life. And you're right. I mean, they were just allowed to hang out together, smoke, engage in all sorts of discussions, and then of course when they were in the courtroom, they just gave free rein to all their political ranting and raving. I mean, there was a certain touch of obviously the German guilt about the past. I mean, so that played into it, that somehow the German authorities didn't want to be too heavy-handed, but inconceivable that anything like that could happen today. But if you look back on the similar kind of trials that were taking place in the United States at the time. And then, Chicago 7. It was just a complete mayhem in the courtroom. And so, I mean, and again, even in this film where they essentially rescue Andres Bada, they just come in. Again, these are not hardened criminals. These aren't hardened terrorists, who are particularly skilled at, at military operations, but they managed to get the better of the German authorities and rescued Andreas Bada from custody. So it was just a very, very peculiar time, sort of the late 60s and early 70s. Now, A Passage to India. There, I think Passage to India does have that. Let's see, let me write this down. Passage to India. Yeah, that was also false claim of false claim of sexual assault. So that's a good idea. FX Trader says, "Is Hollywood ever going to recover, or is it over forever?" I tend to think that it's over forever, because I just don't think it's ever going to have that great era. I mean, I think that's gone. And I think the fact that there's a decline, a really serious decline in cinema going. And I know they'll say, "Oh, because of all kinds of other media and blah blah blah," but it's more than that. It's like, why are newspapers in decline? Partly you can explain it by alternative media, but partly because they're doing a bad job. I think people have just turned away from Hollywood movies. It's just banality, silly, childish politics. Peter says Orson Welles as Lady from Shanghai has an amusing courtroom scene. Yeah, it does. So, well, let's see. But yeah, they Passage to India. I think that's a very good suggestion. I didn't even think of that. So false rape accusations are false. Yeah, false rape accusation, false sexual harassment accusations. I like that a lot. I think, but so that's really really good. Thank you. To Kill a Mockingbird is about false accusation, but it's not a is it? It's not. It's not. Yeah. Okay. Okay. To Kill a Mockingbird. All right. Let me write that down. Let me think about that. To Kill a Mockingbird. Okay. Not really my favorite sort of films. I like films, with where there's some, ambiguity. Not with it's a little obvious, but yeah, but that's okay. Matthew and God says Hitler thought he could take Moscow before winter. It was Germany's biggest mistake, not being prepared for it. Well, yeah, I mean, when one says that they weren't prepared for it, they didn't have the resources. I mean, it's not like there's something unexpected by the fact that winters in Russia are very cold. I mean, that happens every year. Every year winter comes around, and every year it's very cold. So it's not like this. Well, I wasn't expecting that one. I mean, of course, again, those brilliant generals who were poring over these maps knew, hey, it's going to get very, very cold quite quickly. And but the truth was that Germany really wasn't ready in 1941 for this kind of a war. And what should have been fairly obvious to the generals. We don't have the resources at hand. Again, he hadn't, Germany was not running a war economy. Germany had not ordered a full mobilization, so it just didn't have the manpower and didn't have the armament at its disposal for the kind of overwhelming um, offensive that Hitler had in mind. And so, yeah, a few easy victories early on, but eventually Germany's limitations became ever more apparent. Okay. Essie Dillendam says, I think the plan was very close to coming off. I don't agree. I don't agree that it was ever close to coming off. They had no real hope of taking Moscow. It was obvious that the Russians would mount a huge defense of Moscow, and therefore they would mount a very powerful offensive at Moscow. It could have inflicted a devastating defeat, a much bigger defeat on Germany than eventually Germany managed to recover from that. But that could have been it for that whole offensive. So it didn't come even close to succeeding. Joseph Losey's King and Country. Okay, that's a very good one for the court martial. Joseph Losey's King and Country. Yep. That's a good suggestion. As a Paths of Glory, we've already shown that, but so that's good. Yeah, Peter S. says great Australian film directed by Bruce Beresford. That's the one I was talking about, which was Breaker Morant. It really is a very good film. Very like Paths of Glory. I mean, I think it's very moving, and quite painful to watch. But yeah. Jane T asks, would Medvedev be a better commander in chief? It's hard to know. I mean, I think Medvedev is now is so makes these is now such a buffoon with all of his pronouncements, but he wasn't like that when he was president. So he was actually quite an effective president. And remember the war in Georgia. Now, admittedly, Georgia is not in any way comparable to Ukraine. Georgia is a very small country. It's a population of 4 million. What was no big deal to defeat Georgia. But nonetheless, Medvedev showed a decisiveness, more decisive than Putin. But, it's hard to know, how Medvedev would have performed. But Putin's indecisiveness is that's a real issue. Esther Dellendam says the Siloviki say Putin is good with economics but bad with battle. Well, I think that's fair. I think that's what he feels comfortable with. He's kind of a technocrat. When he starts talking about economic production figures and trade, the percentage increase in trade, and unemployment and so on. He feels he's comfortable. He doesn't feel comfortable when talking about military matters. But I think what's interesting, and I was thinking about that today, is how much Putin's rhetoric has changed since February 2022. Go back, read that speech that he delivered to the nation when he launched the so-called SMO. All of it was about NATO. All of it was about the threat NATO poses. NATO is on our borders. Barbarossa. We cannot forget June the 22nd, 1941. This is there's a real immediate existential threat that Russia faces, and we have to act now. That was his theme then. He doesn't talk like that anymore. Everything he says is directed at Ukraine. What he said then was directed at NATO. It was NATO that is posing a threat. He doesn't say that anymore. I mean, he talks about it in general. He talks about the coup in 2014, but he doesn't say that essentially this is Barbarossa. We're facing another Barbarossa moment, and that's why the most interesting part of that interview with Tucker Carlson was that opening question when Tucker Carlson asked him, "What was it that you feared when you launched the so-called SMO? What was the immediate threat that Russia was facing?" I think it was a very good question. I think whether I would have started that as your opening question. I mean, that's a different issue. But nonetheless, it was a perfectly good question. And then Putin then went off into a whole long spiel about Russia and Ukraine, going all the way back to the 8th century, and never really answered Tucker's question. And so it's Putin who has made this whole thing about between Russia and Ukraine, which is very strange because that's not what he said when he launched the so-called SMO, and that would be the only justification for launching it. That it was a preemptive strike in order for Russia not to have to face another Barbarossa, because otherwise it's hard to justify. Anyway. Peter Knopfler says Bernard Shaw's 1929, An Intelligent Woman's Guide to Capitalism and Socialism. Excellent read. 1929, very different attitude. Have I read that? Maybe I read that. It was a long time ago. I was always interested whenever Bernard Shaw wrote about these issues, or Oscar Wilde. He also wrote about socialism, or Bertrand Russell. It's always an entertaining read, but they never, it was kind of superficial. I mean, none of them really ever understood capitalism or socialism. They didn't really know that much about economics, but they wrote as kind of men of leisure, the kind of the English one as amateur. So it was entertaining, but what they meant by socialism isn't really what one normally means by socialism. So I never found them all that persuasive. So like Oscar Wilde would write about socialism. His idea of socialism was, people, writing poetry, doing whatever they feel like doing, without, without any kind of the drudgery that capitalism imposes on them. But again, I want to emphasize. So, any ideas? I think on first of the theme of cinema and court martials. I mean, we've already listed some of them. I think so. I think those are good suggestions. So, any other suggestions about court martial? No, not A Few Good Men. I don't want to do that. I don't want to run A Few Good Men. Just the film just is too annoying. But any others, I'm happy. And then, of course, Cynthia's suggestion of cinema and false accusations of rape and sexual assault, which again, there have been a number of films along those lines. So, again, any suggestions, you got an idea, boom, post it on the Gaggles locals page. So would really appreciate that. Um, So Peter Knopfler says, let's get real. Germany occupied by Yankees 1945 under occupation. There is no identity, and the youth will always be in disorder. No identity for the crowds by the Yankees. Very simple pipeline. Well, it's. I mean, yeah, you're right. But what's I think interesting is the contrast between West Germany and East Germany, because somehow the East Germans, who were under Soviet occupation, did manage to retain their identity. And that was what people were always struck by whenever they went to East Germany, that East Germany was actually much more like the old Germany that one had read about. So West Germany just became this kind of Americanized, kind of colorless, tasteless, odorless, um, historyless, pointless kind of center of American style liberalism. Not really German liberalism, but a kind of American liberalism. But the East Germany was, I think, different. I think it was much more German. They did retain their identity. And I think what's interesting about that is that somehow the East has retained its kind of its good feelings towards Russia. I mean, all these things like the AfD and the Sarah Wagenknecht's parties, who all want good relations with Russia, their base is in East Germany. It's East Germany that doesn't want conflict with Russia, and that I think is very interesting. I mean, so their attitude towards Russia is very different from the rabid hostility towards Russia that you get in Poland, the Baltic states. Much less so in Hungary, but still to a certain extent in say the Czech Republic, but the East Germans don't have that, which is kind of it's a very interesting that despite those 40 years of Soviet occupation, they do not have any of that Russophobia that well, the one that you get in the West, but obviously but the one that you get in all these other countries that were under Soviet occupation. Essay Dillandum asks, I have a question, Mr. Samueli. Are you familiar with Habermas's article, the so-called red line dilemma? It seems to link up with Mark Rutte's speech on increased defense spending. I haven't read that. Let me look that up. The red line dilemma by Jürgen Habermas. I've never been that. I'll be honest. I've always shied away a little bit from Habermas. He's always kind of long-winded and somewhat pompous in the way German academics are. They lot of verbiage without too much substance. So I've never been that enthusiastic about Habermas, but I will look that up. See if he says anything there that's it's interesting. So some questions here on Ukraine, which I think I've already answered. And then Peter Knopfler says, thanks, George. Let you know that my father was born in Budapest, my mother in Vienna, so I'm half Hungarian, besides another European Jew born 1949. So yes, I do have diverse history living in 4 different nations. Okay, well, yes, that's congratulations. So yeah, Central Europe. Let's see. All right. Well, I think it's time. In about an hour here for me, it'll be the new year. I mean, I don't know. We obviously a diverse audience. Some people are already in 2025. Anyone who's in Australia and New Zealand, and then if we have anyone from the west coast of the United States, it's only early afternoon there, so we've got a long way to go before 2025. But anyway, thank you so much, everybody, for this for 2024. Thank you, everybody who has taken part in these live streams. Thank you, everybody who has contributed to the Gaggle, whether financially or whether through the postings, and we're looking forward to another successful, productive year. And I'm going to have to, in the new year, I'm going to have to tell the dogs, well, I know you're very disappointed about 2024. I'm going to try and do better. I know you don't believe me, and that, saying I'm going to try and do better is kind of an oxymoron. But, what can I do? But thank you, everybody, today who spent time with me. Thank you, everybody who contributed to the tip jar. Really appreciate it. We'll be back in the new year on Thursday. Until then, Happy New Year, everybody. Good night. See you in 2025. All the best. Bye-bye.